Here's an opportunity for you to see some of the racing that takes place on Watopia, Zwift's island. It's a Friday afternoon race, starts at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and about 10 guys got together for the race today. The race starts at the statues of the cyclists, and that's after doing about a half a lap of warm-up. But here we are underway, and you can see the group. The guys with the yellow and black striped, for instance, this one right in front of us we're looking at, that's me, that's my avatar. And at this point I'm on the front, not necessarily wanting to be there. But those guys are in the A race. And I believe the blue and black jerseys with Zwift across them, those are the B group riders. There are some other folks represented, though I'm not certain if all of them are participating in the race. Sometimes people come and go because obviously it's not a closed course and there are lots of people out there riding. Though I have to point out, today at this time that we were riding, there weren't as many people on Zwift as I usually see. If you look over to the right, you can see the list that's changing constantly as we jockey back and forth. But at the very bottom of that, you see plus 26 more. That means that on the island, there are the riders you see listed plus 26 more. So you're looking at probably around 46 to 50 riders that were on the island at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What I'm going to do is kind of give you the play-by-play of the race from my perspective. Unfortunately, because I was working so hard just to participate, I wasn't able to switch around in the race. There are some folks who have done that. It's pretty cool because if you go over to the right in the list and you click on a name, it will switch the view. For instance, you're viewing my ride, my avatar. If I were to go over there and click on, say, H. Becker, I would be able to see what he is doing. So the wattage, the cadence, speed, all of those things, I would be able to see what he's doing at that time. But obviously when you're riding and your heart rate is up high, it's hard to concentrate enough to get over there on the sweaty keyboard to make those switches. I do hope that someday I'll be able to log in and just, instead of participating, do this again and do just that, so that it's almost like you're watching television of a race. But for today, you're just going to have to hear my view of what was taking place in the race. As usual in these races, the first lap is kind of everyone testing out how the other guys are riding. As I was looking at the list of riders, I knew that H. Becker, he's a German rider, was someone I was going to have to mark because last week he just destroyed the field. So as I was looking, some of the names I didn't recognize as much. Of course, Weidman, I recognized his name, but he let us know early that he wasn't going to be able to participate in the race because he had a cold. So he was just leading us off for this first, and then he was going to back off, see what was happening in the race, and report the race later. There we went through the green sprint jersey zone. Again, not trying for that at all, just at this point staying in the group, sizing everybody up to see where to go from there. I knew that in this race I was going to have to use tactics. I have not done well in this race at all if it came down to me overpowering any of the other riders. My goal here was to, as much as possible, stay with the group and then take whoever I could. If I could stay with Becker, that was my goal, but I didn't have a lot of hope in that. But that was going to be my approach. The other riders, I just wasn't certain what to expect. I knew that Schum had been strong in the past, so he was another rider I was going to need to watch. The other thing I wanted to watch out for was the fact that I keep getting dropped, and it's happening again. I think I get in the group and I try to find a pace that lets me conserve. On a real road, you can kind of do that. If you get in behind a particular rider, the wind is broken, you're in a group, you can almost soft pedal. Sometimes you can just coast and let them pull you along. You can't do that on Zwift. Perhaps you can for a little bit, but it's tough. So here I got gapped off because I frankly was being inattentive, and I had to work pretty hard to get up to the group that was getting away. So here I was again. You see 700 watts. That's not a good thing. When they're up there, probably doing 275, 300 watts, and I'm having to work to catch up with them. The rollers, that's what we're just going through right now. Those have been a problem for me, though Zwift has done a good job getting those straightened out. What used to be, it was very jerky. You would go into it and your bike would be running free, and then when you came up to the top, it was just really bogging down. But Zwift takes the data that we put in as beta testers, and they fix it for us, and it was much better today. Here I caught, and going that fast, once you catch up with everybody, you go right straight through them. Again, wasn't where I wanted to be, but I was able to catch on. The other interesting thing about this race today is there were hecklers along the course, and I think Shum got most of the heckling added toward him, but that added a neat little dynamic. Sometimes you can see it over to the right on the leaderboard. Little quote bubbles will pop out next to the names, and so if you're watching that, you may see some of the hecklers giving us words of encouragement. So here we're rolling up to the end of the first part of the race. We're getting ready to go into the first official lap. So we've basically done a half a lap. Now we're starting our first full lap. And here's where things will settle down. Again, you've got A riders and B group riders taking together into this course. So it's going to begin to separate at some point. Going back to Christian Wiedmann's report of this race, he let us know that 10 riders took to the start of the ride. It was an international crowd. We had a German, Norwegian, a Britisher, do you say Britisher? An American taking part. There were some other folks along. I think we had a Greek in the field as well, though his flag, I guess Greece doesn't have a flag right now. To decide who is in A and who is in B, Christian, who organizes the races, gave us the cutoff of 4 watts per kilogram of your functional threshold power. I'm a little bit under 4, and so I guess that's why I struggle trying to stay up with the fast guys, but I'm right there on the edge, and so this gives me an opportunity to stretch myself. Speaking of stretching myself, this is one of those opportunities. This is the climb. It's the Watopia KOM climb. So that's why you see the numbers, the little stopwatch above my name with the time counting up, and then to the right of that, the 140 time for the rider that I think is actually participating in our race. I wasn't sure if Jay Maru, if the FR stood for France or if the FR stood for Friday race. But he was hanging out with us, and he was holding at this point both the green jersey, the orange jersey, and the mountain jersey. And here you see he had the mountain jersey. I'm with Baker and Shum. you can see that we are starting to get like a 6-second gap on one of the B riders who's hanging right there with us. And then In-Law, who I believe he was an A group rider. My objective here was just to stay in contact with Becker because I knew he would probably be the one to the top. And frankly, even at this point, I realized that at any time during the ride he wanted to launch, there was just no way I was going to be able to follow. I am putting out 400 plus watts coming up this climb, heart rate 175, 174. That's right on the edge for me. I have gone up this climb faster, but if I were to do that again at this point, my race would be over. So goal here was just to stay with those guys, and 1, 2, 3, we came over with the fastest times on the climb. And you can see that now the polka dot jersey has switched over to Becker, and Maru now only has the orange and green. Going to speed up things because at this point we were basically staying together. You'll notice in the fast forward that I am getting gapped and catching up and riding with. It's just a constant yo-yoing back and forth most of the time for me. But I was thankful to be able to stay with these guys. We had pretty much formed a 40-second gap on the next rider, who was Kay Dalby. So I thought at this point that the three of us would be the ones to decide who would get the win. And even at this point, I mean, I'm not trying to sound like I'm giving up, but Becker is strong. So I was figuring that it was going to end up being between Schum and myself. And you'll find that it doesn't necessarily end up that way. So here we are coming out of the tunnel. That means we're headed into the final stretch to begin lap number 2. So here we go. We have gotten ourselves separated. Kay Dalby had earlier, you probably couldn't see it because we were going too fast there. He was commenting, wait guys, wait. And someone, the heckler, commented and said, hey, pedal faster. So I guess he decided he would. So I'm looking back and I see the time he's starting to gain, 10 seconds on him. He had to be flying. I threw in the power up. You'll notice the little arrow helmet up there with the bar around it. It's disappearing. I gave myself a little bit of an aero boost so that I could get a little bit of rest before we start up the next climb. Becker began to move up. Schum was there. Dalby was really closing it down with now 4 seconds behind us. So he was going to be a factor. This point, I began to think, well, let's see what I can do in trying to create some type of gap, another selection, and perhaps I can get it narrowed down to just myself and Becker. That's one of the downsides of racing on Zwift. Actually, you can see there that Dalby caught up with us, and now he's with us. But one of the issues with Zwift is you can't look over into the face of someone you're riding with to tell where they are as far as their ability, whether they're tiring, how strong they're riding. That's not possible. So you're kind of flying blind on that. The only thing you can do is if you look over in the leaderboard, you can see the watts per kilogram changing. For me right now, you see it's 6.6 kilograms, 6.3. Becker's doing 7 point something, 8, because I guess he's trying to close the gap. Then Dalby is moved in right behind that with 7.4, and Schum is appearing to start falling off. So I was thinking, it's working. I've got to keep this up Um, Dalby's surprising me, but looks like we're beginning to get a gap on Schum. So maybe I can stay with Becker. So I kept trying to ride on that edge. Here again, 180 beats per minute. I am on my edge, 414 watts. Uh, I realized I've got to conserve, so I had to shut it down just a little bit, or I knew that Becker would be away on the other side. Again, Dalby was an unknown, but I took some comfort in knowing I was beginning to gap Schum a little bit. Then Dalby comes around me, and it was almost like I was sitting still. He took off, and I just had to let him go at that point. For me, once I hit 180, I'm hurting. 184, I'm hitting around my max. So I had to let those two guys go, and at that point I knew I was stuck to myself, because that gap that Becker was beginning on me was going to grow at this point. So I tried to form a selection, and I did. I kind of launched Becker and Dalby off on their attack and got hung in the middle between them and Schum. Other than that, you had to go back almost a minute to get to another one of the Friday training race riders. At this point, I wasn't trying to sit up and wait for Schum. It was just a matter that I was having to recover. You can see my heart rate beginning to drop. I was trying to keep enough of a wattage to, if possible, maintain. I was just hoping he was hurting as much as I was hurting at this point. But I looked and noticed it was coming down from 20 seconds, 13 seconds. It would start coming down even further. As my heart rate started coming down, then I began to raise the wattage a little bit because I was feeling slightly better. But still, it was a challenge. I'm going to let things run here for a little bit without commentary as you watch Schum catch up with me. Again, 12-second break, 10-second break. He's coming on fast.
Great job, Dalby.
What you heard there was me talking to my iPhone. Zwift has an app, and that app allows you to text people or send a group message or an individual message to the people that you're riding with. And I found it kind of frees me up to be able to just hit the button and use the dictation of the iPhone in order to send the messages. That works sometimes, but if there's ambient noise of the fan or the whirring of my kicker, it works or doesn't work. So it can be very frustrating, and something funny happened at the end of the race, actually, where I called one of the riders Sweetie because for some reason that's what my iPhone thought I was saying. We're again speeding up here a little bit because it's just me and Schum just riding against each other. I admit at this point I was riding kind of negatively. I just could not see myself riding away from him. And so at this point my strategy shifted to being there to sprint against him at the end. So my goal from this point forward was simply to stay with him. And then when we got to the end, which would be in about 2 laps, I would be able to come around him in the sprint. I've been able to do that in the past with some other riders, so it was my hope I'd be able to have the legs at that point. I thought it was the last lap because we had just starting the 3rd lap, or finishing the 3rd lap, so I thought, okay, is this the last one, which would be 4? But I got that clarified, and it meant that I still had 2 more laps to go before we were finished. So that solidified my thoughts that I was just going to have to stay with Schumann. He was giving me a run for my money on the climb. Had to close that down so that I could stay with him. And it wasn't a given that I would be able to stay there. He might ride away from me like the other guys did. So settling in, staying with him, and then seeing what would happen in the final. Meanwhile, Dalby and Becker were slugging it out. You could see that they were riding right together, 2 minutes 10 seconds, 2 minutes 30 seconds ahead of us, and it would stay that way. Actually, it would grow from there. Toward the end, you'll notice they even go off the board in front of me. So it really was a race between Schum and I for 3rd place. In-law was still there. He had inherited the green jersey. Here we are going back through the rollers. We were using the B Doctor guy for some drafting help. He rode with us for quite a bit. That led us into the final lap, and here's where the rubber meets the road, where it would be decided between the 2 of us. You can see at the very top, Becker just went off, but at that stage he had like a 3-minute gap on us. As it would turn out for the finish, Christian reported that on the last lap, Dalby made a big move on the last climb and managed to establish a 20-second gap, and he held that to the finish line. I'll just point out here as well that, to his credit, Dalby was using what is called Z-Power. That's where... Well, I need to pause here for a second. I'll be back to that story in just a moment. Here, Schum was saying to me, no power-ups to the finish. Agreed. That meant that neither of us would use any power-ups that would come to us at the green sprint zone. That would mean the feather, which would be allowing us to be lighter in some of the climbing areas, or the aero helmet, which allows us to get an aero advantage. So I agreed to that. Seems only fair that it would be the 2 of us on those powers, and we took off again. But going back to Dalby, there's Z-Power, which is where you're using a dumb trainer without a power meter, and Zwift creates the power for you. So it's an algorithm based on how fast you're turning that wheel, and if they know what type of trainer you have, they can extrapolate from that what your power numbers are. It's not an exact science like it would be with a power meter with a strain gauge. So it is possible that someone with Z-Power could have a stronger wattage than they actually are putting out. So Dalby, though he took the win, which is pretty obvious that it was either him or Becker, he later came back and relegated himself and took his name out of the finish because he didn't want to have a suspect finish. So I really appreciated that, and I'll ride with him anytime, Z-Power or not. Sounds like a stand-up guy. Well, here, Shum says, okay, I'm just going to drop you. We're not using any of our power-ups, so if you're going to catch me, you're just going to have to do it the hard way. So I thought, I can get him. He attacked me at the bottom of this climb, but I'll be able to get him. But here I was, 500 plus watts, and he was still going. I was closing it down a little bit, but not nearly as much as I would have liked. So we made that climb. We came over the top, and I thought, okay, well, I don't want to catch him too fast. I don't want to wear myself out trying to get up to his wheel. So I am going to work it up slowly. We came into the rollers and started up the climb again, which is hard once again to hold a smooth, steady pace. But visually, it appeared I was going to close him down. But he kept hanging out there at like 1 second, 2 seconds. So I was trying to find that approach where I could catch him, but do it without putting out as much power. So here I thought, I'm going to come over this. I'm going to get him right here. And once more, visually, it appeared that I was, but 1 second. So then I began to watch to see how hard he was working by looking at his watts per kilogram under his name. And I said, okay, I've got to get up on him. I've got to conserve, because if he just pushes hard all the way to the finish, I'll be too worn out to come around him on the sprint. So it was nip and tuck, still working to get there. I knew that once we got onto the straight, something drastic was going to have to happen. And here we came to the tunnel, and this is where we're going to start the sprint. You can see it's a downhill, 2.93% grade at this stage, and I knew if I wasn't going to get him, if I was going to get him, it was going to have to be soon. He had a 2-second gap on me coming out of the tunnel. At this point, I was starting to get scared that I had gotten a gap, or he had gotten a gap on me, and I was just not going to be able to close it down. But you've just got to try. So I put it down, waiting to see if I could get up to him, and then I would attack. I kept noticing he seemed to sit up a little bit, and I was able to come around him without going up into major wattage. So I was thankful for that. But the one thing I know for sure, I kept going so he wouldn't pass me later. It was fun. Hey, I don't want to take up all your time. Be sure to go to idoit4.org and locatance.com and join us for one of these Friday races. They're great fun.